VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And welcome to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Well, for many months and now going into years, we heard the administration talking about a national health care program that was going to be instituted, and there was talk that if such a plan was implemented as the president was proposing, that indeed there was going to be a constitutional challenge to it. We found that there was a very contentious election that took place then in the state of Massachusetts after Senator Kennedy passed away, and the replacement promised to be the 40th vote to block Obamacare from taking place. You saw the shenanigans that were taking place in our Senate and in the Congress at that time, whereby the Senate deemed to have passed the House version of what has become known as Obamacare. Christmas Eve. And then we have seen, of course, the promised challenge to the U.S. Supreme Court take place, which was held earlier this year. This week, when we are now anticipating that decision, we are told that decision from the Supreme Court will be released on Thursday. Here to discuss this issue with us today is James Lansberry, who is president of the Alliance of Healthcare Sharing Ministries and vice president of Samaritan Ministries, a free market healthcare coverage alternative. He speaks out regularly on issues related to healthcare, including the economics of healthcare, healthcare public policy, healthcare tax policy, and the healthcare industry in general. James, thanks for joining us today here on Crosstalk.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
Well, as you know, Supreme Court looks like it may come out this Thursday, the last day of their session, and rule on what we know today as Obamacare. Many have touted the impact of this decision, James, as the largest of this court since Roe versus Wade. What are your thoughts on the magnitude of this decision?
Well, I don't know about largest since Roe v. Wade, but it's certainly a hugely important decision, especially if the court decides to uphold the health care law. It sets new ground for precedent in the area of what Congress can actually force American citizens to do. And it's something that we need to be watching carefully. I think that if the court overturns the law entirely, then it's also going to be historic as well, because rarely does the court find something that is this large and then overturn it as a whole piece. Go ahead.
Could you provide these scenarios? I mean, we're looking at, in anticipation of the ruling, what are the options the justices really have?
The options the court has, and obviously they've made their decision, they're editing their opinions right now, and so there's only a handful of people in the United States that know exactly what's happened. The options that the court has had is to, A, uphold the law in its entirety, which there's a significant portion of people that think that there's a strong likelihood of that. The second is to overturn the law in its entirety, and the third is to uphold part of the law and strike down part of the law. And most experts believe that that's the likely place where the court will fall, but exactly which provisions they will uphold and which provisions they will strike down there's still a lot of controversy around that, and it's we're all waiting with bated breath to find out exactly what the court has decided concerning this law, so we can stop speculating and start reacting.
Right. And now, if this mandate for participation is struck down, the individual mandate, some have argued that this really causes the other parts of Obamacare to really collapse, just to tumble under the weight. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, I completely agree. The worst possible thing as far as an economic decision that the court could decide is to say that the individual mandate in itself is unconstitutional, but everything else in the law stands. Right now, the individual mandate kind of ties together two other very dangerous provisions with itself. One is called community rating, which means that everybody who buys health insurance has to pay within a certain percentage of what everyone else has for the same policy. And so you can't charge sick people considerably more than you charge people who have not been sick. And that's, we call that community rating. The other is a guaranteed issue provision, which means that health insurance companies will be forced by law to, no matter what your health history is, no matter what your current health is, write you a health insurance policy as soon as you ask for it. And so it'd be much like having a law that required home insurance companies to sell you a policy right after your home started on fire. And obviously no insurance company could stay in business with that kind of provision.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that guaranteed issue, and the guaranteed issue, what makes it work for the insurance companies to keep them from going out of business is that individual mandate that will require people to go out and purchase insurance whether or not they want it. And that's the offset that was there, and that's one of the reasons why people believe that Congress didn't put what's called a severability clause into the bill, which is standard procedure. In most state and federal legislation, you will find somewhere contained in the bill a severability clause which states to the effect that if part of this law is deemed to be unconstitutional, the rest of the law will stand. And that's called severability. And in this particular bill, rare occurrence, there is no severability clause, and some people believe that was on purpose so that if the law gets struck down, the individual mandate part gets struck down, the rest of the bill will go with it, and that's why the Supreme Court may decide to go ahead and strike the entire thing down, even though there's parts of it that there's absolutely no argument can be made that it's unconstitutional. You know, there are taxes in this bill that Congress has the power constitutionally to tax, and so there's absolutely no way the Supreme Court could legitimately say this tax right here is unconstitutional. But because of the lack of severability clause, the Supreme Court can decide that the whole thing falls as one piece as opposed to each individual part of the bill.
What do you see, James, as really being at stake with this ruling?
Well, I think what's at stake with this ruling is whether or not Americans are going to have any resembling control over their own health care, or whether the government is going to make all of our health care decisions for us. You know, the government already spends 48 to 49 cents out of every dollar in health care. They're already the largest controlling influence in the health care market. It is the most heavily regulated industry in the United States, and so there's huge amounts of government control over it already. But right now, before the passage of this bill, Americans are still free to choose what kind of a health insurance policy they want, what the benefits of it are, and whether or not they want to purchase it at all. And once this bill passes, we'll no longer have that freedom, and so Americans will pay a significant penalty if they choose not to have health insurance, which I actually believe will be the unintended consequence of this bill. I think that many Americans who are well will decide to go ahead and pay the $800 or so penalty for not having insurance, and then when they get sick, go out and get health insurance at that point. And I think that will be devastating to the health insurance market. It'll be devastating to American health care in general, and I think it will make everything more difficult, increase wait times, increase costs. And that's just part of the biggest problem of this bill is that not only does it not accomplish its stated goals, which is to insure more people in America, it actually does the opposite of what it's named. It's called the Patients Protection and Affordable Care Act, and it does anything but produce affordable care. All of the cost drivers economically in the bill will drive health care costs up through the roof rather than finding some way to see them start to have a market leveling that we would see.
James Lansberry is our guest here today, President of the Alliance of Healthcare Sharing Ministries and Vice President of Samaritan Ministries. James, the Obama administration knows that this case is pending before the court. I mean, they knew when this passed through Congress, when the Senate deemed to have it passed, that it was going to be challenged. They know that when this case came before the U.S. Supreme Court, that some very weak arguments to defend the bill were given before the court. And despite knowing all that, they have been spending huge amounts of money since this case was argued before the court, implementing the provisions of Obamacare, drafting new rules to forge ahead. I mean, the Department of Health and Human Services has been going ballistic in their rulemaking authority and spending all this money to implement these things. Knowing all this is going on and pending, they didn't put the brakes on spending. They've been accelerating it to no end. Isn't this really irresponsible governance?
Well, it depends on what you mean by irresponsible government, because their argument would be, and I disagree with it, but their argument would be that we believe the Supreme Court is, of course, going to uphold this law, and if we wait until after they decide to start implementing it, there's no way we can actually make the schedule that's outlined in the law. That would be their argument in favor of going ahead and spending the money. The money's been allocated. Congress has appropriated it, and therefore we need to go ahead and spend it. I think that more likely the scenario is that they're actually trying to entrench parts of the law into our actual operations in the United States before the bill could be overturned, and actually making it very difficult to repeal portions of it that even if they do strike down the entire law, there are portions of it that will make it very difficult to repeal and make it very difficult for religious freedom and personal freedom to sustain the day.
Now, what will happen then to the billions of dollars that have been already spent or pledged to carry out the law if parts are struck down? I mean, the federal government has paid out $5 billion to companies to help cover health insurance for early retirees. The government's paying 10% bonuses to most primary care physicians who treat Medicare beneficiaries. They've awarded billions of dollars in grants. There's been all these agreements and contracts with pharmaceuticals. Healthcare providers have absorbed many costs under the law. What's going to happen with all this money? I mean, where will things stand?
Well, the money that's been spent is spent. There's absolutely nothing anyone can do to get it back. There may be some congressional investigations over those who made the decision to spend the money while the bill's constitutionality was still in question. And so, but once the money's been spent, it's very difficult to get that money back, and Congress probably will not even attempt to do so. And the big deal is what's going to happen with the money that's about to be spent? What's going to happen with these state exchanges that have already been set up? Will they just be left to die, or will the states continue to set them up for whatever reason? And the grants that have been given states. Now, some states have gone ahead and, because of the Supreme Court case, turned the money that they got for grants to establish their exchange back to the federal government, saying, no, we don't want this money anymore. We'll actually give this back to you because we're not going to establish an exchange in our state. And so those are historic occasions where state governments giving money back to the federal government. I think that's because a lot of Americans believe that this individual mandate portion of the law will be overturned.
James, if Obamacare is struck down in whole or in part, won't this just create a huge vacuum in healthcare-related issues?
Oh, it sure will, especially if it's struck down in part. If it's struck down in whole, then what we'll have is some of the money that's been spent will have been spent on potentially productive things like grants for electronic medical record transition. And so some of those funds will just continue to go. Congress may appropriate other things for those, continuing those parts of the bill out, the ones that are less dangerous to the American economy. But what it will do is create a lot of uncertainty in the American people. So we believe the health care was broken, we fixed health care, and then we overturned the fix. So now what are we doing? What does that mean to me? And especially Americans who are on Medicare and who will be on Medicare soon must be concerned about the balloon payment that's coming as more and more people retire and as the Medicare tax ratio goes down. And so Medicare is facing a huge trillions of dollars of unfunded liability in the future, and this bill actually exacerbated that on some level because it was a job-killing bill.
James Lansberry is our guest here today, President of the Alliance of Healthcare Sharing Ministries, Vice President of Samaritan Ministries. We're going to take a quick 60-second break and come back to talk more about this pending U.S. Supreme Court decision ruling on the Obamacare law that had been passed through Congress. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation author and scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what is the weirdest example of animal and flower symbiosis that you've heard of?
Chris, there are some truly marvelous examples where each one helps the other. And here's one. There's a strange flower in Africa which has a protruding spike which seems to have no function. The spike has no flower, produces no seed. What's it used for? Now, this plant can only be pollinated by a specific bird, which collects pollen from one and takes it to the other. This bird has to have a long enough beak to get the pollen, but the flower is so long that the bird can't get to it from the ground. So the spike provides a perch. This is amazing. The perch has no function other than to help the bird pollinate the plant. Who would have thought of that? The wise and powerful Creator, that's who. He designed this well, as He did all of creation, and He did it all back in Genesis.
For more on Genesis, visit our website at icr.org.
we understand it's this Thursday that the U.S. Supreme Court decision will be weighing in, giving their decision, making it public anyways, as how they're going to be dealing with this nationalized health care law and its constitutionality. We're waiting for that. We're looking at this pending ruling and certainly the implications of this as well. We're speaking today with James Lansberry from Samaritan Ministries. James, what is the long-term fallout from the Supreme Court decision as it relates to health care? And we kind of touched on this before the break, but do you believe, will our system collapse if all of a sudden Obamacare is ruled unconstitutional?
No, I don't believe the system will collapse if Obamacare is declared unconstitutional. I think if the Patients Protection Act is overturned in its entirety, the system will start to correct itself. I think some of the provisions of the bill, like the mandate for covering dependents up through age 26, for example, that will probably remain. Insurance companies will have a very difficult time backing away from that particular mandate, and other provisions like that have already been implemented, they will probably be implemented by insurance companies without being forced to, or be continued on by insurance companies irrespective of being forced to take care of them. But insurance companies will continue to offer policies, doctors will continue to accept patients, Medicare will continue to operate as it has, and so healthcare will not collapse if the bill is overturned in its entirety. It will still be struggling. Healthcare still has some serious problems, the greatest of which is the lack of patient engagement in the cost picture, and we could talk about that as the interview goes on, but the healthcare will still be in trouble in the sense of an entitlement. Medicare and Medicaid are still way underfunded and over cost. There's very little that we can do in the current schema to be able to rein in those costs, especially as more and more Americans start retiring. But the system will be back in similar position than it was before the Patients Protection Act was passed, which is a very difficult and ailing system, but not a collapsing system.
And as you're pointing out, James, there's no doubt reform is needed in healthcare. If this whole thing is ruled unconstitutional, reform is needed in healthcare. Are you aware, are there any proposals pending should the Supreme Court strike down Obamacare?
I'm not aware of any actual proposals that the Republican Congress has sitting on the shelf right now ready to be passed. I know that there are proposals out there that have been discussed, and I'm not sure what the level of agreement is under the majority party in the House, and definitely don't know how those will fare in the Senate. One of the proposals that's been out there for a couple of years now that actually is the best proposal that we have for fixing the ailing healthcare system over time is to level the tax playing field for all healthcare expenditures. So, for example, right now, if you spend $1 on health care, it's completely tax-free as long as your employer spends it for you. So if you have an employer-provided health care plan, it's completely tax-free from all payroll taxes, all personal taxes, as long as your employer makes all the decisions and spends all the money. And this is what's backed us into this system where we have a perverse incentive to spend too much on health care and only buy it through our employer, which is an awful model. People lose their job and then they lose their health insurance because of it. And so no one should have health insurance policy that's tied to their employment. And so the way to fix that is to level the tax playing field, either by making those dollars taxable again or by making all healthcare dollars completely tax-free, whether I pay cash to go to the doctor out of my own pocket, or I buy my own health insurance privately through an insurance agent, or whether my employer spends that money on insurance, that it's exactly the same as according to the tax code. Either taxable or not taxable, it doesn't matter, but we need to take away the government policy choosing that employer-provided insurance is the winner and any other healthcare dollar is the loser.
You talked about patient engagement in the cost picture. Elaborate on that.
Well, patient engagement would be a natural following from leveling the tax playing field, because if patients have to see the cost, so I'm paying for my own health care dollars out of my own pocket, an individual consumer, an individual patient who is informed and being concerned about his own costs will always do what we've seen in every other industry, like the computer industry. We will drive costs down and quality up. But right now, the patient doesn't know how much it costs, and so there's no way to affect the cost picture by shopping around. And in addition, the insurance companies, actually the doctors, client. The patient is there, and he gets paid because of the patient, but the patient's not paying his bill, the insurance company is. And so the actual customer there that the doctor responds to is in the insurance company, and that's just a backwards picture. And so if we re-engage the patient through higher deductible plans, through more patient-centered models like health savings accounts, at that point, then the market will naturally work to drive cost down and quality up, just like we've seen with LASIK surgery since insurance companies stopped paying for it several years ago. LASIK surgery 10 or 12 years ago would be tens of thousands of dollars per eye. Today you could go out and get LASIK surgery in most major markets for under $5,000 for both eyes, sometimes under $3,000, and they'll buy you a dinner. And the quality of the procedure has gone up. It's much more successful than it was before. People are much more pleased with how they've worked out. And because of people paying for it out of their own pocket, the performance of LASIK surgery has become more common, more affordable, and better quality.
Well, we talked about the long-term fallout as it relates to health care, but what about what's your thoughts on the long-term fallout, politically speaking?
The long-term fallout, politically speaking, is difficult to tell. The law in its entirety is overwhelmingly unpopular. But if you survey Americans on particular features in the law, those particular features are, some of them, including the guaranteed issue provision, very popular. And so who wins the PR game during the election will actually determine exactly how that political fallout transpires. And so if the Democrats are successful in saying, look, they overturned this law and it was going to force insurance companies, these dirty, rotten insurance companies, to take all comers. And we did that for you, and they overturned the law, and they won't let us pass it again. So that is part of the political fallout. If the American public says, yeah, I want the insurance companies to be forced to do that, then the political winds will shift to the left. If the American people are not fooled by that and they decide, no, we actually want insurance companies to be able to respond to our concerns, not the government's concerns, and the right can win the rhetoric contest, at that point, then the winds will start to shift back to the right. The biggest difficulty we have, though, is still the great need of entitlement reform, the unfunded liabilities that are sitting out in the future, which is a ticking time bomb coming in the next 20 years. And the political will to actually have full entitlement reform is very small. Other than, Republican Paul Ryan, who's the head of the Budget Committee, you really don't hear too many American politicians willing to admit that Medicare is on a collision course with insolvency. Mm-hmm. And that's really the problem that needs to be fixed most, because we've got seniors who are counting on the government to come through for them, that the government has made promises to them for the last 30 years, and then we have an ailing system that's going to go bankrupt, and really no way to fix it if we don't start soon.
Do you believe that when this decision is released here on the 28th of June, if it is indeed struck down in entirety or in part, that there is going to be just a huge political scramble to get something passed, legislatively speaking, before the November 6th election?
No, I don't believe so. I believe that any scramble to get anything passed will be met with gridlock. I mean, certainly there will be bills introduced on both sides of the aisle, but I don't believe that in an election year that they're going to be able to accomplish a bipartisan, noticeable reform. Certainly it would be wonderful if they could find something that both the Republicans and the Democrats and the president could agree on that would get through both houses of Congress and actually reform the healthcare system now and not wait around until the new Congress comes into effect next year. That would be a wonderful thing. But political winds rarely work that way in an election year, and so I expect to see large bills come from the Republican side and pass the House, and large bills come from the Democratic side and either be filibustered in the Senate or be passed in the Senate, but completely die in the House. And that the president will come out and make statements about things that he thinks Congress should pass. But because it's an election year, I don't think the two parties are going to be content to work with one another. I've not seen in my adult life an election year, bipartisan effort actually work out, and that's really what it would take since Congress is split right now.
You represent Samaritan Ministries. It's a healthcare coverage alternative. If you could maybe explain how it works, and is Samaritan Ministries and the type of healthcare coverage alternative that you are you governed under Obamacare, or does your organization have a waiver?
Well, I'd be glad to explain it. Samaritan Ministries is a non-insurance approach to healthcare. It's called a healthcare sharing ministry. We're a group of 20-plus thousand families sharing over $5 million a month in medical bills, and we're not regulated under the insurance laws, nor are we regulated under the Patients Protection Act. Now, thankfully, by sheer miracle from God and bipartisan efforts, we were able to get into the bill an exemption from the individual mandate for our members. So even if the law stands, there will still be this pro-life Christian solution sitting out there of ministries like Samaritan that people can choose to be a part of and not pay the penalty for the individual mandate. And so that's certainly one encouraging thing. But if the law falls, those ministries will still be in existence. We don't depend upon the individual mandate for our existence, and the individual mandate, thankfully, currently doesn't threaten our existence. And so what we're looking for is for the Supreme Court to do what's best for the nation, not what might be best for one ministry or one people group or another.
Because in essence, I mean, you were in existence even prior to this proposal even coming about.
Right. We've been sharing needs since 1994. We've been around for a long time. We've grown from a handful of families to over 21,000 families today, and our members are very excited about what we do, and we're excited to have them and to be able to serve them. And I think it's a great option for a lot of Christians. You can find out more about us on our website at SamaritanMinistries.org.
Okay, give us that website again, please.
That's www.SamaritanMinistries.org.
Okay. And folks, you can check them out as well. Let's get to the phone lines here. If you'd like to ask a question here as we await the Supreme Court decision, the tenets of the Patient Protection Act, is known as Obamacare, the matters pending here with the U.S. Supreme Court decision, its impact, the implications, your thoughts pertaining to it. Our telephone number, 1-800-733-9829. 1-800-733-9829. It's amazing to me, James, to see the comments that have been coming from a number of legislators when they were approached by a reporter asking the question as to whether or not this Patient Affordable Health Care Act was constitutional. Nancy Pelosi responded, "Are you serious? Are you serious? You know that it's not constitutional?" She said she has examined it and it is constitutional. Senator Patrick Leahy says nobody questions the constitutionality. Senator Bob Casey, well, I don't know if there was a specific constitutional provision. Then we have Senator Jack Reed. He said, let me see. I'll have to check the specific sections, so I'll have to get back with you. Senator Bob Nelson of Nebraska, he says, well, you know, I don't know that I'm a constitutional scholar, so I'm not going to be able to answer that question. But interesting responses coming from a variety of legislators.
Well, and that's really one of the reasons the Supreme Court is so important here, is that their job is to go ahead and guard that. But, you know, Congress really ought to be looking at the enumerated powers clause in the Constitution and what powers Congress actually has and what regulation they can do. But it's been, you know, hundreds of years since the Supreme Court has actually bound Congress to everything in the enumerated powers clauses. And so the confusion is rightful there, that it's very rare that congressmen ask themselves when debate is going on the floor whether something is constitutional. The assumption is if we can pass it, it's constitutional. And that assumption goes for both sides of the aisle fairly consistently, though, you know, both sides of the aisle have very large concerns about particular envisions in the Constitution, free speech and such, and, you know, both the ACLU and Religious Freedom Foundations are both concerned about the First Amendment.
We're going to take a quick break and come right back to your phone calls. I see we still have a couple open lines here, 800-733-9829. Your questions, your comments here pertaining to the pending U.S. Supreme Court decision coming later this week. We'll be right back.
There are three major events that changed history forever. They are creation, the fall, and the flood. These, combined with the promise of Christ, are all rooted in the book of Genesis. Yet many in the church are treating these cornerstones of the Christian faith as allegory, which only sows confusion and undermines faith in the accuracy of the Bible itself. In the book, The Big Three, Dr. Henry Morris III reveals how the Scriptures negate the concept of theistic evolution, why a living faith and a saving faith exemplify a solid belief in a special creation, and the connection between the creation, the fall of man, and the flood, and how these pivotal events led to Christ, and eventually the cross. The book is a call to return to a confident trust in God's Word. To obtain your copy of The Big Three, send a donation of $13 or more to VCY America, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. To donate by phone, call 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America as we're speaking today with James Lansberry from Samaritan Ministries and taking your questions, your comments here as it relates to the pending U.S. Supreme Court decision that they will be rendering, or making public, that is, later this week. Their decision was basically made within the very week that they heard the oral arguments, unprecedented number of hours before the U.S. Supreme Court. They have been writing opinions and or dissenting opinions, depending upon how the ruling is coming out and how the justices have stacked up their thoughts on the issues. And we should know by Thursday morning, as the court releases their opinions here on the last day of their session, exactly what their position is. We're taking your phone calls here today at Crosstalk. Our number 800-733-9829. We're going to begin in Ohio. Connie, thanks for calling. You're on the air.
Yes, my comment is to James and the statement that was made regarding there is no other health care being implemented or even thought of at this time. And so if there isn't, I understand that we need something. I don't agree with the whole Obama health care. However, I do agree with a majority of it based on the fact that I have seen numerous healthcare providers look at charts and determine their care based on what type of healthcare insurance the individual has. I also, with my daughter, a year after she went off of my insurance, ended up extremely sick, owed her physician $3,000 because she didn't have a job. She was in school full-time and was told that she could no longer be seen, and I'm sorry, but you literally will have to die. Now, at what point do we say enough is enough and have some type of health care for all individuals in this country? When I traveled Germany, I spoke to one of their medical students, and they used the U.S. as examples of what kind of health care not to have based on the fact that people have to choose life or limb because they can't afford anything better.
Okay, Connie, we'll have them respond to this issue at the same time. We've got people coming from all over the world coming to the U.S. for health care. Give us your thoughts on this, James.
Well, sure. Part of the difficulty we have is that our cultural makeup changes how we expect different things. Healthcare is one of those features where everyone thinks that we ought to be able to expect to have the best healthcare in the world for free for everyone. And the difficulty with that is the only way you can get the best of anything is to be willing to pay for it. If you required all Americans to buy a car and then required them all to own a Mercedes-Benz, those are two completely different things. And we're looking at life and death situations with healthcare. We're also looking at life and death with food. And the difficulty is when government starts making the decision about what healthcare you need and what healthcare you don't, that's where some of the problems enter in. And it's the government's interaction into healthcare that have driven up the costs and limited the access to healthcare, not the other way around. And so when you want to have healthcare for everyone, what you really need to decide is, does that mean that everyone has equal access to health care, or does that mean that everyone has equal quality of health care? And because if equal access to health care, then you want the health care system to be as free from regulation and as free from government interaction as possible. If you want quality of care, then you want to have the least common denominator, and the government is the best place to make that happen so that everybody can get the exactly same bad health care and as slow as anyone else. And so right now, if you go to Canada, you can wait as long as 6 to 8 months to get a CAT scan, whereas in Pittsburgh, you can find more CT machines, more MRI machines in the city of Pittsburgh than the entire nation of Canada has. And so the market actually produces a larger quantity of goods to be available and more doctors, more hospitals. But right now, doctors are deciding to retire early because of their fear of the new regulations. Reimbursements for physicians are at an all-time low from Medicare and Medicaid, and the more Medicare patients we get, the harder it is to find physicians. So unless you want to believe that it's okay to enslave doctors, you have to say that health care has to be paid for by someone. It can't just be created out of thin air any more than food can be created out of thin air. And then we have to decide on the best delivery mechanism so that all Americans can have access to the same quality of the same kind of care through the same mechanisms. And then we have a charitable safety net to make up for what Americans can't. And so right now, America has a phenomenal safety net, but the problem is that fewer and fewer doctors are taking Medicaid, because Medicaid pays so little and so slowly in most states. And so the government taking over health care won't solve that problem. It only exacerbate that problem.
Connie, do you have a follow-up question or comment here for the...
Yes, and everyone will.
I'm sorry,
everyone
Connie?
Will be seen.
Hello, Connie. Do you have a follow-up to what he has just said?
Yes, I do not agree with him. I fully believe that until the United States has a healthcare system that all have free access, free health care, or payable health care, somehow, whether it's through Obamacare or whatever care, that there is no way that people will be taken care of in the same manner, in the same dignity, with the same quality, with the same mortality and morbidity outcomes as somebody who has money. Someone who has money that walks into the hospitals right now or has insurance receives better care than someone who walks in there who has Medicaid, Medicare, or who is paying on a payment plan.
Medicare and Medicaid are actually insurance programs, and so the people who are uninsured are not people on Medicare and Medicaid, and that's part of the difficulty. And Obamacare does actually expand the number of people on Medicaid, not lessen it, and it's Medicaid that is giving worse care than the people who are uninsured to. And so you can try to convince yourself that people, if putting everybody on Medicaid, would equalize the roles, but it will equalize the roles in the worst possible way. Mm-hmm. Right now, people in Germany who are rich have better access to health care than people who are poor. And the way that they have that is they get on a plane and they come to the United States. Mm-hmm. And to try to have the same quality of care for everyone, irrespective of their ability to pay, will only create bad health care for everyone, not good health care for everyone. Because in order to convince somebody to spend 15 years of their life in medical school and residency, you have to actually encourage them by having them be able to make a decent wage when they get done with that. And right now, doctors in Germany make less money than auto mechanics do in the United States.
Connie, thanks for your call here. Let's go next to Charlie in New York. You're on the air, Charlie.
Yes. Thanks, guys, for the show. Appreciate it. Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question. I'm a professional firefighter, and I got hurt in the line of duty and went out on comp. Okay, that's an issue with the back. Over this winter, I slipped, fell, hurt my arm, ended up tearing some tendons in there, and ended up with rotator cuff surgery. Now, I have Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Excellus through the city. They pay half, I pay half. It comes to about $3,600 a year that I'm paying for this prime-time insurance. Well, when I went to physical therapy, gave them my Blue Cross card, they turn around and says, well, wait, this isn't your primary. I says, what are you talking about? I pay for this insurance. And they said, no, you're on Medicare. I said, Medicare? I don't have a card. I don't know what you're talking about. No. Called Blue Cross Blue Shield. They told me, well, as of April 1st, 2011, the law is that if a municipality has under 100 workers, we have 73 in the city where I work, under 100 workers, Medicare becomes your primary, and Blue Cross becomes your secondary. Now here, I'm proud to pay for insurance. I don't mind that at all. I'm very proud to pay for my own insurance. They're putting me on a system, Social Security, Medicare, going broke, and the government turns around, makes these new rules to take and put me on Medicare for primary, and then the woman at physical therapy says, I says, well, what am I going to owe then? Well, whatever Medicare doesn't pay. She says, well, submit it to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and say you owe $20, now I have a $15 copay each time I go to physical therapy for my shoulder.
Any thoughts here, James?
Well, I don't think I could have said any better. The problem here is not that the insurance company has defrauded the man. The problem is that the government has interfered into the market to the extent where he's actually getting less than what he thought he was getting and less than what he paid for. And that's the more the government takes over of healthcare, that's exactly what we're going to see, is that there'll be less choices, less options, and less understanding of what goes on with this. And, that's exactly what we have in the other countries that have a single-payer healthcare system, is that there are fewer options. And so you're going to wait a long time to get to the one doctor they allow you to go to, and you're not going to have any choices, whereas now when I pay cash, because as a Samaritan Ministries member, I am a cash patient at every doctor. I can choose whatever provider I want to walk into, and as long as I'm willing to pay them, they're going to see me. It has nothing to do with what my insurance covers. It has only to do with what I want to see and what I'm willing to pay for. And if you want Americans to have choice in healthcare, you need them to have freedom. If you want them to have a lack of choice, then you let the government take everything over.
Thank you for sharing that, Charlie. To Kathy in Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, and thank you for many of your programs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm calling to this is a big concern of mine, too. And I know it sounds impossible, but I think the example we need is for our congressmen to get on the Medicare plan and then let us know how their life turns out. And stop giving them all the perks that they really don't deserve, and they get whether they're working or not. Even in Wisconsin, our congressman left the state for how many days and still got paid with credit cards.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more that if the government's going to insist that Medicare is adequate insurance for our senior citizens, then those elected officials should be forced into that same system. Problem is that they've got enough money that they can go pay cash for it, whereas most of our senior citizens don't. And so when your doctor won't take you, you're stuck. And he's not even legally allowed to take money from you for things that Medicare doesn't cover. And they won't be bound by the same system. And so it's very difficult to enforce that idea, but I think it's a fantastic idea.
Thank you, Kathy, for calling. Our number 800-733-9829. Mark in Kansas, you're next. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Mark Harvey. I'm in Lynn Valley, Kansas. And I've been listening to a lot of the people that have called in about high deductible and they need an affordable health care. And I just wanted to say that since 2004, I'm a pastor, and I've been with Samaritan Health. And it's the best, most affordable financial decision I've ever made in my life, and I'm 58 years old. And my wife has a $2,500 deductible at her work, and I've never paid a deductible. And I've always been able to negotiate my bill because I don't have insurance. And hospitals have said, this Samaritan and the groups like Samaritan are very respected groups. We have good relationships with them. And I've had everything paid. And the amazing thing is it's a Galatians 6:2 mindset, and where you're helping a brother bear a burden. And I guess the thing that I would say is this is the epitome of the term no-brainer. It is a no-brainer. This group is really a respected group. I've never been satisfied with the phone calls I've made into insurance companies. I've always been satisfied with the respect I've been shown with Samaritan. And I'm just saying that people have been calling in with all problems. I'm not having problems, and I'm getting things paid. A heart catheter, very expensive. I was able to have that paid. So I'm just saying, if people would look past the problem and listen to what this gentleman's saying, Samaritan might be a real blessing in disguise for a lot of people.
Mark, thank you so much for your call. We have a break upon us. We'll be back in 1 minute. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Today, we look at number 15 on our list of 20 characteristics of false teachers. Number 15 is false teachers cause personal and doctrinal division within the church. Romans 16, verse 17 speaks to this. Now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause divisions and offenses contrary to doctrine, which you learned, and avoid them. So indeed, false teachers cause personal and doctrinal division within the church. Jude 19. These are sensual persons who cause divisions, not having the Spirit. You know what? It's okay to have divisions when it's us standing on God's Word. 1 Corinthians 11:18, there must be divisions among you to know who is approved of God. Yes, false teachers cause division, and when we stand against false teachers, we sometimes cause division because we're standing on the truth of God's Word, and that is okay. It's okay to cause division when you're standing for biblical truth.
Well, we're talking about the pending ruling coming out this week on the Patient Protection Act, Affordable Health Care Act, what many just simply narrow down to the term Obamacare, and that's been picked up all across the nation in that regard. But interesting testimonial there just before the break here, James, about from this pastor in Kansas.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear a satisfied member of our ministry call into the phone. I've been on the radio a number of times. I've never heard a negative testimonial call in with. Our members are very excited about what we do, and I appreciate the pastor's time to call in and laud our excellency. It's always nice to hear someone else say it.
Okay, let's go back to the lines here. By the way, our number 800-733-9829. Jane, you're next in Madison, Wisconsin. Go ahead.
Hi. You may have discussed part of this issue because I turned in late. I turned 65, 100% on the job, and I don't have any plans to quit. And my insurance company kicked me out and put me in Medicare, of which I fought. I went to my congressman. I talked to a lot of people, and they said, nope, this is a deal the government made with the insurance companies, and the insurance companies were a big part of it. They asked the government to take those of us who are sick, who are more not sick but more prone to getting sick off of their roles. And frankly, people that are working past 65, I don't know that we're sick people, but at any rate, and so we just got put into Medicare. So now we are competing for, resources that are scarce. Our grandchildren are going to have to pay for this, being put on an entitlement program when you're fully employed. It's just a travesty. And I'm glad to hear about Samaritan. I'm going to check and see if there's any way I can switch from being on Medicare when I don't need it. I am employed.
Thank you, Jane. Go ahead,
We
Jane.
would love to have you. You can find us online at SamaritanMinistries.org. That's SamaritanMinistries.org. And I do want to spread the blame out just a little bit. It is not just the insurance companies who like this kind of a plan, but the employers who are trying to offload as much of their costs as possible. And that's part of the difficulty with a huge federal budget and a Congress that's willing to spend money, is that it becomes easier and easier for private interests to offload their own expenses to the federal government. And because the federal government can continue to spend out of a deficit and can continue to accrue a debt, there's very little negative recompression for this. And so I would encourage you to check us out online and to try to encourage your other friends to vote in ways that encourages us toward more personal freedom, more personal responsibility. Those are exactly the kind of solutions that we need to have.
Thank you, Jane. Next to Kathy in Mound City, Kansas. You're on the air, Kathy.
Hello, I was listening earlier to Connie, and I sympathize with some of her issues, but I wonder if, rather than forcing people to buy health insurance, because people that can afford that already have it, and people that can't aren't going to buy it anyway. I'm one of the victims of the economy. I don't have a job. I don't know what I would pay for health insurance with, and I wonder if maybe rather than forcing us to buy health insurance to provide health care, perhaps our government could make some sort of subsidies or grants available to clinics so that health care could be affordable. I don't want to buy health insurance that will only cover me if I go to the hospital. I haven't been in the hospital in 35 years, and I had a baby then, and I'm telling you that's not going to happen again. So
Well, I applaud your desire to stay out of the hospital. It certainly is a good way to stay healthy, stay far away from the hospitals as possible. They tend to breed infections and make things difficult just because of the nature of having multiple people with multiple conditions in the same place. But the government subsidizing clinics is already going on. They have many federal programs called Federal Qualified Health Centers where they're giving an enhanced Medicaid rate to people. The only way you can get served in those clinics is, one, to sign up for Medicaid, which in some states is more difficult than others, and in other states is more difficult to find doctors. And the other issue is that it just takes those dollars, and anytime the government subsidizes something, it tends to get more expensive. What we need to do is lower the amount of regulation so that you could actually go see a nurse practitioner in one of these clinic in a box, like at a CVS or a Walmart, and go in and see the doctor for $10 or $15 instead of paying $100 or $200 for the same doctor visit, because they're trying to actually appeal to cash customers who are uninsured. And we have them all around there in strip malls, places. I don't know where the closest one would be to you, but I'd encourage you to look and Google Cash Clinic and see what you could find out there. And I think you'll find their rates extremely affordable for uninsured people. I use them myself for my own family, and I think they're a great idea. But part of the way that we achieve solutions like this is less regulation and less government involvement, not more government dollars.
Thank you, Kathy. Sherry in Kalamazoo, Michigan, you're on the air.
Yes, hi. I listen to you a lot. I just started, but my dad used to listen to you all the time. But my comment is that I just think the whole situation here in my state is all twisted around, because my dad worked all of his life and he retired, and then, he purchased his insurance for him and my mom. But here in the state, the Medicaid program is available for just about anybody with children. And they don't have to work. I mean, as long as they got kids under 18, they can have a lot of kids and live off the Medicaid. And then his co-pays, like for medicine and hospital visits, hospital stays, doctor visits, is just outrageous. And here they can go to the doctors, for no fee. And it just... it's just heartbreaking because he's on this tight budget, and
appreciate that. We're just about out of time. A quick comment there, James, if you would.
Well, I think that expanding Medicaid rules has certainly exacerbated the healthcare situation for everyone, especially people outside of Medicaid, because it drives up the cost for everyone else and makes it more difficult for people to get into a physician. So I completely agree with her on that and encourage her to look for ways to see the safety net become more to a private charity than public charity, and I think we'll see the solution start to work its way out, because private charity will always be more efficient and more effective.
Thank you, Sherry, for your call. We've run out of time on the broadcast here today as we are anticipating the decision from the U.S. Supreme Court coming out this Thursday in its ruling. We'll know more with more certainty just a couple days from now, as to where things stand. But for those who'd like more information about your organization, Samaritan Ministries, if you could give us that website again.
And the website is www.samaritanministries.org.
Great. Well, James, thanks for being with us here today on Crosstalk.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us here today on the broadcast as we, again, await this decision coming out Thursday of this week. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.